Hey there, Brian.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm hanging in there. How are you?
Doing good. Things are
Good.
warming up a bit.
Actually, not just hanging in there, but in the last episode we recorded, you said something about the relationship with anger being about not being the victim of your own anger. And there was some other stuff on that about, other people might be the victim of your anger, but make sure you're not.
Right.
Um, And I've been kind of applying that across the universe of emotional regulation, right? And finding that there are choices available in the moment about how to be that weren't necessarily seeming available for the last 49 and a half years. And it's not like they always are, but there's a I guess I'm cultivating a more of a conscious practice of, the classic one for me is my wife will ask me at 2 in the morning to get her some water because she's nursing or something. And I want to be helpful, but out of my mouth comes this like grumpy, grouchy 2 o'clock in the morning, like, yeah, I'll get you water. Why didn't you think of it yourself before you went to bed? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
whole story going on. And if in that moment, instead, I can be like, I got you. Yeah, I'll totally go get you water and I'll be happy about it. Then everything's different. So I've kind of I'm hanging in there, but I'm hanging in there with this mindset of not being the victim of any of these kind of stories and feelings that come up in the moment. And I'm missing the target plenty of times,
Sure.
but it's been interesting how that kind of stuck and
Yeah.
um,
Well, when we stretch our cognitive model, new choices appear.
mhm,
And that's because we're steering by the cognitive model. That's our map of London. And if we wake up to certain back streets that we didn't know were there, we can end up in new places or better places quicker like
yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
Um, well, there was a thread on that I want to do an episode on, that I haven't introduced yet. So we'll save that because just before we started to chat here, you mentioned that you were reading Yeats and that there was some timely and and from what you shared with me, also like kind of um, vivid imagery that goes with what you were reading. So why don't you read a little bit and then we can talk about what your reactions are and mine and see where
Yeah,
we go.
yeah. Now this is a piece that's bubbled up a lot in the past weeks for not for no reason. And Yeats wrote this in 1919, so they were in the standing in the wreckage of World War One. Which, if we think about World War One, we had this promise of technology, which I had referred to before. They'd have world expos, which was basically like, come and look at all the cool new stuff that'll become mainstream before you know it. And then this horrific war, mustard gas and trenches and the dying in their own vomit, and if you study that, you do get the feeling that a whole generation sort of rushed into that. And I think we've spoken about that before. It was started with we are always told in class, and I can still remember in school being told the story of Archduke Franz Ferdinand getting shot, and it being this comedy of errors from this revolutionary gang that couldn't shoot straight, that had missed every opportunity, and then somehow the guy ends up on the right street at the right time and pulls this shot off and just like you know but it seems like if that had not lit the fuse, it was inevitable that something was going to light the fuse. And that
That's my recollection. Yeah,
yeah,
Germany and France and I think Belgium were all geared up, ready to go.
and the Austro-Hungarian Empire was in its, and this was all what it like in the wake of the Ottomans. sort of losing their influence. So there was a time we can't really entirely grasp. But we've talked about this before, philosophically, in the idea that we had this scientific revolution where we doubted everything, including God, including retribution for our ill acts or whatever. And instead of being set free by that, as many people thought might be the case, uh, in fact, we sort of have locked ourselves in a zoo with our own lower emotions somehow, and find that things are more complicated than the reasoning mind thought they might be. And so we have the two minds kind of thinking about it, right? And we talked about this in one of the mysteries of language is that we can speak science with it, but we also can speak of a dream world or of all these images. And that's kind of what Yeats is talking about in this, which is, of course, filled with Christian imagery, uh, coming out of England, 1919s when it was written. And it's called The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of spiritus mundi, the spirit of the world, troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
Yeah.
so so this is not science. We can't measure this with a machine. We can count the numbers of the bodies, and we can have intellectual political theories, but he's pointing to something that's known maybe better by that other mind, by the mind maybe that understands wholes and coherences, so therefore it has to extend around and include the shadow, whereas that left brain daylight cocksureness, I said before, reason is a whore, and it can serve any purpose if the underlying impetus is sufficient to steer it that way. And here he's sort of pointing to that deeper thing that somehow finds expression, that was the sort of the statement of that age, that this new thing is being born, has been born, and now here we are 100 years later.
So the falcon and the falconer, right at the beginning, um, I guess my interpretation of that was kind of like, um, power is loosed from uh, reason. The falcon being power, and the falconer being a reasonable guide that has more than instinct, right? Um,
The bird of prey has been loosed.
yeah. Um, I mean, it was more to it than that. It was that it was separated from its master.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Um, So yeah, I'm just thinking about kind of like the release of the unconscious onto the world, and why, why wasn't it um gated? Why wasn't it managed by the falconer? um I guess Nietzsche would say because God is dead, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
rationalism and materialism and modernism, whatever word you want to use, had reached its natural end.
which is why he's waiting for the second coming,
Yeah.
which is what it's called, the second coming. And, yeah, as if again, salvation is necessary to come from above.
Uh-huh. What do you make of the body of a lion and the head of a man? That's kind of a weird image.
Yeah, it is. It is. Coming out of the sands of the desert.
Yeah, it reminded me of that. Was it Zarathustra that had the um, uh, everybody's um,
The lion in the desert.
yeah, the camel and the lion and the dragon and the baby.
Yeah, yeah. And it definitely has that. It's a reiteration of the predator archetype, but this time with the head of a man.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And also maybe something to do with the regalness of the lion. And was this the an association with a specific empire? Or and that's where
Uh-huh.
the bird images also, there were a lot of bird images and the double-headed eagles and the
Well, the Lion of Judah is a common symbol, and it's in the desert. So the kind of a reference to the Holy Land, maybe.
right. And I mean, it is slouching its way towards Bethlehem,
Hmm.
um, which in his day, I guess, for the Western Christian world, would have sort of represented the spiritual center of all the main traditions, and so the creatures coming to capture the heart of this is one of the things I think the reason that brought it up was I saw a post by Paul Fenn, who we interviewed, and it was talking about the way the capitalist oligarchic machine works and how it has no values that it has to uphold, and so it can take any form that it needs to take. It can be uh, inconsistent with itself a second later, because it holds no principles. And and that I immediately thought of this. And was this the thing that was born?
Hmm.
Um, connecting with that rise of fascism, uh, as a response to the anarchy that's loosed upon the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I guess I thought of I thought of the anarchy that's loosed upon the world, was kind of the anarchy of the human psyche. Um, say more about why you think this is. You said it's bubbling up. This has been bubbling up.
Oh, I've just
Why?
seen it. I've seen it in a few different places.
What do you think its
Yeah.
relevance is to today?
I think to all the hot wars and the hegemonic contests that are we're particularly in a hot chapter of these sort of conniptions uh, serve as temporal markers, like before and after, Like in America, we talk about antebellum for everything before the Civil War, and I guess postbellum for everything after it. And bellum, of course, is just the Latin word for war. And so, so yeah, these things that, and again, this sort of dovetails to a lot of my other questions. If there is this unconscious element that's bubbling up, that's using all the reasonable stuff just to get what it wants, then is there a periodicity to this? You know, like what is the nature of this as a collective psychological phenomenon, as a periodically reoccurring conniption, um, which is a technical term. Uh, and you know, is this a type of brakes wearing out, so the car crashes that inevitably forces us to
Invent better brakes.
redesign the car? Is this a self-organizing system hitting the boundaries of its current arrangement, its current balance, needing to go into a state of criticality to be forced into a reorganization of its mechanisms,
Yeah.
you know. And I, you know, and of course, along with this, I've been reading Creative Evolution by Henri Bergson, and I'm in the part of the argument where he's juxtaposing instinct with intelligence.
Okay.
And so this is almost kind of a sideways version of that question. Is war an expression of our instinct? Because it's a hard case to make that it's out of intelligence. Not that intelligence doesn't serve it, but, you know, is this some other thing that plays out that, you know, manifests, that takes over certain people in certain places, driven by a field of mass psychology?
Yeah. Um, I mean, we've talked before about the necessity, even in the episode we just did about anger, the necessity to um, have have lines that cannot be crossed, right? And what happens when those lines are crossed, in some sense, is war, or at least that's one way war can happen.
You know, traditionally, yeah.
So I don't know if that's instinct or intelligence, but it's not necessarily without virtue. At least if your reason for getting sucked into a war is to do with setting things right somehow.
Yeah, well, and that is the dynamic nature of it, is the way that it flows back and forth. And we always end up in an in-between situation because there's always plenty of innocence tangled up in the midst. And uh you know, wars, I think, are different than smaller scale human conflicts in the way that mass psychology differs from individual psychology, and that the dynamics aren't always as clear, but it is clear that some effort is put in to manipulate, um, in both cases. And uh, so yeah, this has to do with your anger not working against you in a similar sort of situation, and yet realizing that uh, you know, like again, a famous story where the guy goes to the Zen master, and this is a guy that had been very poor, but now his business was becoming successful, and he had to entertain guests and potential business associates at his home, but whenever he did, his wife was so stuck on the years of poverty that she could not show any graciousness as a host. So she wouldn't put out the best food. She wouldn't, there was always this kind of clutching. And so the guy goes to the Zen master and he's like, "What do I do about this? It's going to ruin us. And all this hard effort that we put in will be for naught if this keeps happening." And the Zen master says, "Okay, okay, send her to me." And so she goes and she sees the Zen master, and he says, "Have you heard of this game that the kids play with the rock and the scissors and the paper? You know how to play that?" And she says, "Yeah, yeah, I know how to play that." He says, "Okay, I've heard about it. Show me, how do I play?" And so she says, "Okay, well, here you do, and you're going to throw out." And she explains it, and they start going, and he keeps throwing out rock. And so before long, she catches out. She keeps throwing out paper, and she realizes that he's not getting it. And uh, so then she says, "Okay, you can't." She explains to me, "You can't just always throw out rock, right? You can't always keep your hand closed. Sometimes you got to mix it up a little bit." It's like, "Oh, okay, I get it." So they play again, and I don't know. Maybe he throws paper over and over, and then she's like, "No, you don't get it. Sometimes your hand needs to be closed, but other times your hand needs to be open." And with the idea of Shaolin, we have this bow that uh, is an open hand and a closed hand. With this idea, and whether it's Shaolin or it's the internal, there's always this idea that there's the fist and the palm that represent the sun and the moon. That represent this
Yin
that
and yang.
the yin and yang, and that the balance has to be in the center. So you can't always push, you can't always be pushed, right? And uh, and yet at the same time, we know that often when conflict uh, arises, well, I have to say, as someone that has studied the 36 strategies, right? There are certain realities to it, such as the easiest time to rob a house is when it's on fire, right? I've mentioned that before. The other one, the easiest way to kill is with another's hand, at least the easiest way to get away with it, right? And so once we realize that there are some people that might actually have vested interests in setting things on fire and in encouraging people to fall victim of their own anger. And as a theme, as a running theme, because all the themes will return to you, right? As a running theme, who's often guilty in the chair of doing this? It's the rhetoricians,
I
right?
thought you were going to say whoever smelt it.
No, no. Well, I mean, there is a sort of a stink to evil rhetoricians, right? And to using language not in the service of truth. And there is some logical common wisdom, the idea that the first casualty in any war is the truth. So we know that, and this is what I always say, because these conflicts happen, and it intentionally, it's sort of, there's a setup of a moral dilemma there. Well, which side are you on? Well, since we know all the things that I just laid out, from a Buddhist perspective, we also know that when evil people have their way, the suffering increases. When the non-evil people have their way, the suffering decreases. It's just a general rule of thumb kind of thing, right? Like the volume dial on your radio, right? So we know that when a lot of these things happen, there's some evil people here going on. And we know that when the numbers get beyond a certain size, and it's not a huge size, we start to see bell curvy kind of stuff happen. So we can be sure that in any large group, there's going to be some people that are evil rhetoricians, to say it from the Platonic worldview. And and so if we let those people have their way, then uh, we'll just get farther and farther away from eudaimonia, from the good life, because they're not practicing virtue, right? So clearly so whose side are you on? Well, obviously, I'm on the side of the people that are practicing virtue, and I'm not on the side of the people that aren't practicing virtue. Okay. Now, if we could just get them to wear baseball hats but it turns out that these evil rhetoricians will actually wear the baseball hat of the opposite team on occasion. So the whole baseball hat thing, you know, waiting for science to come up with a thing like the test for the replicants, right? Thank you, Phil K. Dick. Do androids dream of electric sheep? Uh, that's a nice metaphor, isn't it? If only we could have a test that would tell us, is this a robot that's being run by a programmed thing, or is this a real human being? Because we kind of know that the robots, they tend to, this is what the evil rhetoricians use, you know?
Some of this conversation reminds me of a quote by St. Augustine that I read recently. I don't know if I mentioned it here. Um, I think it was something like the truth. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself. It's attributed to St. Augustine of Hippo, which I assume is the main St. Augustine, but I could be wrong about that. Could be another
Um,
St. Augustine.
I should know my St. Augustine's. Um, the one that I read, I don't remember him with a hippo, but uh, there weren't pictures in a lot of those old books. So, um, but yeah, I mean, there is this idea that a certain massaging goes on to win people over to one side, because when things start going in a mass direction, clearly the more mass, the more likelihood of some type of success. Pyrrhic victory, though it is likely to be. Um, so yeah, boy, watch the rhetoricians. They are writing some big invoices in times of war, and um, so so yeah. I mean, I think that it's interesting. It does sort of plug into the models that we've brought up before. Um, as far as being manipulated and you know um, particularly, I mean, I guess what is also here that we haven't said, like, okay, we can add a little thing to the cognitive model, and that gives you a choice, right? But there's also ways to put in viruses into people's cognitive models. And those viruses will do exactly the opposite. They will remove choice. And so that's one of the mechanisms that an evil rhetorician will use, because if there's a lot of choice, people scatter across the spectrum. But we're trying to scare everybody into this one boat because we need their vote, or we need their quiet compliance, or we need, so we've got to make this rhetorical pump, and then later on, inevitably, weapons of mass destruction, inevitably comes out that it was just the work of the spell cast by an evil rhetorician, you know, and that it didn't speak to our reason. It spoke, in fact, to short circuit something in our cognitive model so we could just jump right to emotional reaction, you and however that shows up, you know, and but my suspicion is always that when the things that when hot wars spring up, there's usually some very cold minds behind them on both sides. And uh, it's not that conflicts don't happen, it's that the different pathways of resolution have different costs and different profits. And so the question becomes, in the modern world, do we ever have truly honest brokers? Um, you know, so and that's what drives the crypto revolution. Is the effort to create a no trust system, right? This is a tangent. But this idea that's so fundamental is the problem of trust amongst humans, that if we can find a technological solution, it actually can free us from ourselves in a certain sense. If we make things that we ourselves can't manipulate, it's the idea. It's like the idea of a smart contract that we were talking about. When this gets, officially paid off, and then the computer releases the NFT or whatever to the payer. And it doesn't take any particular person to stamp it or to sign it or to file it in an office or to give an approval or to be an overseeing government official to decide that this is their chance to let out their inner uh, pinche tiranito. But that was what drove the quest for a mathematical solution, which is kind of interesting. You know, it's almost like that fight between the two minds, right? The mathematical mind's like, oh, look at the demon of human frailty, and well, we'll math our way out of it, right? By not letting a person that can be bribed or manipulated sit in that chair at all, right? And that's what I think is going to be happening to currencies. And that's what crypto really is
Mm.
that sort of dehumanization in a positive, happy way out of the economic system, out of the. And Bucky Fuller complained about that. I remember one of his quotes. I think in what was that wonderful book at the end? Um, he talks about countries just being blood clots in the circulatory system of resources and value on the planet. And he was an engineer, so he thought in these big pictures. He thought globally, right? The world game. He built a big thing that was a 200-foot globe that that would mechanically lay out flat or would go up and create a whole globe, and you could walk around it. And they said that a 500-acre farm was big enough you could see it on the planet, on the model, to sort of let people get the numbers.
Mm.
I feel like when I went to Europe, flew over it to go to Africa, it gave me a chance to actually get scale. And he was trying to do that as like an engineer would. Let's build a thing, you know.
Yeah.
But but that's interesting because that's another thing, but yeah, a side path back onto Henri Bergson. He says we shouldn't be called Homo sapiens. We should be called Homo faber, Faber, to fabricate.
Yeah. To
The,
manufacture in German.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what our intelligence is really built around, which is an interesting argument about taking things and imposing a form on unorganized material. That's what he way he puts it. And as someone who loves to make things, that does sort of reveal. He talks about our ability to decompose and recompose. See something, be able to take it apart, see its pieces, and then re-put it together in a new whole. So now you've got a whatever you conceived of and he talks about the mobility of some things and the immobility of others. And in this case, the immobility, he's talking about like an animal that's born with a tool, like rhinoceros has that horn, and it comes with the instinct of how to use that tool, and it comes already organized. But humans, We don't see matter as much as we see form. So humans work with disorganized material and use intelligence to organize it.
Can you say more about that? That humans don't work with matter; they work with form. That seemed like it connects maybe to some of the semantic world conversations. Is that where you're coming from?
Yeah, and the fact that you don't a human can see the table when he looks at the tree or the boards, and your dog just sees the boards. And because instinct is focused kind of on what is, but intelligence is this idea of an adaptation to future and to unforeseeable circumstance.
Yeah. What
So
could be?
that so that when we see matter, we just see it as formless matter that we can make stuff out of, as opposed to just seeing things. And then the idea of getting to the form and the thingness of it being the mobile part, and the form is the thing that we push onto the matter, and that's the kind of the immobile part,
The what part?
the immobile,
Immobile. Uh huh.
right? Because we're making the table according to the plan that we had for the table, so that's the table we want to come out. But we did it out of a tree that may have grown this way, it may have grown that way, it's just disorganized material. So it's really mobile in that respect. And, so yeah, so it's interesting that the way he comes at things, because 'cause we're still working our way up to élan vital. What is the the urge that drives evolution? At least his picture of evolution, which is, different,
Yeah.
kinda curious.
Yeah. I guess Yeats doesn't really point at that too clearly. The Elan Vital.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's or maybe it's presupposed in the Christian worldview,
Mm.
um, so that he's more there is that worldview that can get quite polarized, and that will see, demons everywhere, so to speak. And, and I have a feeling that within that world, talking again about 115 or so years ago, uh, I think people were not as relativized. That I think that their polarities were more iconic and more monumental somehow.
I guess I associate that pe- uh, people being less oriented towards, say, an objective truth and more what you're calling relativized um, as part of what happened through postmodernism.
Yeah, well, I think it happened really uh, with Descartes, and just took that long to trickle through, and that postmodernism was just the last expression of that. That maybe postmodernism would argue that modernism was the expression of that, and that they're trying somehow to repair it, but without any respect to what it was before it was broken. Which, in fairness, that was a long time ago. So, and our accounts are circumscribed to some degree. So,
Yeah.
um, but no, it is another window on that same story through history. And I suppose, if you wanted to be real Jungian about it, you could say that there is a collective process of the shadow being reckoned with on a collective level that maybe it hasn't been possible before. This is what I'm kind of trying to plug into technology's role in this, not just in smart bombs, but in the communication of human thought across what used to be boundaries. and it's the influence of that on a collective consciousness about things. And I think that that's the wrestling that's going on, which is part of the gyre, to use a word that doesn't get out of the shop much, you know.
I only remember it from Jabberwocky. Did
Uh,
gyre and gimbal or Jimble in the wabe?
right,
But it's a
exactly.
real word,
It's definitely a real word. Yeah.
and
Turning
I
and turning
assume
in the
uh,
widening gyre.
related to gyroscope. So turning
Spinning, yeah, yeah. Turning and turning in the widening gyre. That's where the falcon cannot hear the falconer.
cannot hear the
Um,
falconer.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned by that blood-dimmed tide,
Mm.
right? Which I mean, that's definitely war. When the best lack all conviction and the worst are full of passionate intensity. Sounds to me like the evil rhetoricians again. Just can't
Yeah.
get away from the evil rhetoricians. Plato knew it.
What did he suggest?
Plato,
Yeah.
dialectic,
You just talk to them.
uncover truth,
Yeah.
foist them on their own petards. I mean, that was a later guy that said that, but um, who was a bit of a rhetorician himself. Um, but that's the idea of media now becoming two way. And I don't recall what McLuhan would have said about that because when I was young, way back, the pterodactyls had just died, and all the media was one way, with the exception of letters to the editor, wherein certain ones that were chosen, would be printed with some response. And that was about as interactive as it got. And the interactive technology at the time was the telephone. You could call into a radio show, and that became a way to try to push into the interactive direction. But now, wow, like we're super interactive.
Yeah.
And so this should give all of the closet dialecticians just the opportunity that they've been waiting for, uh, which has started to happen. And I think that this idea of the intellectual dark web, which is from back and before the, the enlightened days of fools and sages, that was back in the old dark days of this technology being unfolded. And this idea that maybe uh, this dialogue will enable new thoughts in the new expressions of the spiritus mundi, right? That was the other kind of curious thing in there that, you know, when a vast image out of spiritus mundi is this old idea of the world spirit, and which might be, this idea of the collective that sort of
Mm.
expresses itself, that is free of any individual person's will to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about World War One. I think, or even earlier in this episode, as kind of an expression of collective shadow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See what it says here. Spiritus mundi. That's going to be an old idea. Latin, of course, so got to be old. Particularly in the work of Yeats, the Irish poet, not English. Could I say English? Uh, refers to a universal consciousness or collective unconscious from which inspiration and imagery arise, often associated with a world soul or a
Mm.
shared pool of human experience and memory. And this would have been, I guess Jung was cooking this stuff at the same time, similar to Jung's idea of collective unconscious.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
it sounds like it's suggested here, but I'm not sure it was explored.
yeah, I think that this idea of the spiritus mundi might be the thing that artists through time channel that's transcends just what everybody seems to think by having this deeper collectively psycho-emotional component to it, that then certain things show up as somehow iconic of that moment, and then they sort of take that on somehow. um, yeah, it's sort of the opposite idea of an egregore, which we've spoken of before, where it's through conscious uh, attention or devotion that this unconscious vessel starts to charge up. This is more like saying that the charge up of this thing comes first, and it finds a vessel that suits it for the
Huh.
moment. um, which is, if you've ever heard of the account of when Hitler sees the spear of destiny, which has all this psycho mythology that goes around with it. Uh, there is what some people have described as a first person account of demonic possession. This, of course, being the spear that supposedly was used on Jesus Christ on the cross,
Yeah.
and the one of the myths around it saying that whoever held it would rule the world. So this is one of Hitler's fetishes, I guess. And so now we can call this episode Hitler and whatever we name it.
Nicely done.
We can get the double title. but but no, there is this curious idea that I mean, Plato, going all the way back, said, "Know thyself." And this was printed up on the wall, right? So he wasn't talking to just an individual. And I wonder what the actual Greek was. I should be able to find that, and whether it was the collective you, like y'all need to know y'all self, as we would say in the vernacular American. And that that might be the real, content here. Uh, is that you're going to manifest. This is sort of the theory of the philosophical anarchist,
Mm.
that when everyone has their own master internally, then the world won't need external masters. You won't
Sure.
need meter maids. You won't need a cleanup on aisle 5, right? Because it'll be the people will clean it up if they, I mean, in other words, there's some sort of a self ownership around keeping the cart on the track. And it's called a philosophical anarchist because we don't have a lot of historical chapters to point to where this was the case. um, but that is that idea that, if you know yourself and you integrate these things, then they don't erupt.
Mm.
And which is another fun connection, speaking of erupt, because the sun, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but the solar weather has been cray cray and has caused a lot of actual eruptions in volcanoes and things waking up. And
Mm.
so that's always fun.
Yeah.
If you forgot you were on a planet.
Yeah. Seriously. Yeah, I saw something about a volcano in the Pacific, I think off the west coast of the United States, that has like a mile wide crater, is apparently ready to blow and could set off something like 10,000 earthquakes if it does. Um,
And Yellowstone's been going up and down for
uh,
a while now. and, uh, and I did see some, I guess the mixture of the lava has to have the right amount of iron to really get a good lava geyser going, to not just get the dribble down your chin kinda thing, but to get a real spit take out of your volcano, if you gotta have the right mixture of goodies down under there getting liquefied. But of course, I know this because I've been seeing pictures of these things going off. And did Etna go off, or is it wanting to? I think I saw something like about
Yeah, I
that,
think it did go.
waking up.
Uh, I think there was an evacuation.
Okay, I think I did see that too. So that's kind of interesting, and somewhat. I'm sure that if one has a penchant for prophecy, one could find some connection in there.
There, yeah, there always are.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, Etna started to erupt.
Now, see, if you were superstitious, you might think that that's not disconnected from the spiritus mundi. And how separated can that be from the sun? Nous sommes du soleil, right? That's today's rock and roll reference from the Tales of Topographic Oceans by Yes. Fun album written about the autobiography of a yogi. Nous sommes du soleil. We are of the sun.
Hmm.
And that sun solar old religious idea,
Yeah.
and not without its scientific basis.
Hmm. Well, I don't know. That might be a stopping point for us.
Did I just
Um,
spin out?
no, no. Is there more?
Well, I think that you remember that Chinese curse, "May you be born in interesting times."
I do.
I think that's where we are. I think we are firmly planted in interesting times,
Yeah.
and
To
um,
be fair, that's usually the case.
I think it's probably a relative thing, and with this
Yeah.
hyper novelty curve, things are only getting more and more interesting.
Yeah. I just know that every generation thinks that something unique is going on.
Oh, I know. Can you imagine the guys when they saw the first wheel?
Yeah.
Dude,
Interesting times.
it's like and it goes around, and I'm sure we'll find some use for it.
Game changer. Yeah.
Exactly. And, no, there's a number of those I think that were and the I Ching is famous for attributing the philosophical insights that resulted in certain fundamental, inventions, like the ting, I think, or the ridgepole of the house. It's like when they did this, they took this idea from this. I had said before that a lot of these older traditions, they're not so much definitive in the way they work, but they're relational. So they're going to tell you that a yellow mare is related to a certain time in the summer. And you're going, it's like, well, but then you start plugging in a lot of different things into that, and a color, and a sound, and a few other animals, and one of the sides of your house. And, you know, there's literally, it's an erector set of relational possibilities, which is another way to find meaning in the world around us, which is different than the empirical. It's another way of building a model of, spider webbing your way through things and finding relationship,
Hmm.
uh, that's based on some perception of what it becomes the question. And this is the fundamental hermeneutical problem with these ancient texts, right?
Mhm.
Got back to the second H word. um, but uh, but yeah, I don't know. Interesting. And where did we start today?
Where
Yeah,
with Yates, or before that with being able to choose in the moment.
right, right. And again, I mean, it seems like the story of history, you think about these cats like Caesar and of course Marcus Aurelius, who, you know, all the quotes he left behind.
The ever attributable.
The ever attributable. Uh, and it is this idea of will and controlling the will and understanding the power of our own will, uh, understanding that it isn't just the form, and the way we speak about this, it's like, well, the mind is like all these ideas and matter is just all this stuff. But a big aspect of mind is the willing of things. That's what moves us into the future, right?
That's the that's the
Intentionality.
That's the aha that I was trying to share earlier. It's not just having a choice, it's that there's the the potential or the opportunity to apply more will than I had been in those moments. And realizing there's a lot of headroom there in terms of how much more will can be applied in moments.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny because I've had that experience before in different contexts, but at like 2 in the morning, it just hasn't been that accessible.
Uh-huh. And directed by awareness, refined
Some
by
ideal
clarity,
state. Yeah,
and then applied with will. Yeah, there's some formula in there somewhere.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that actually makes me think about prayer a little differently too, um, because prayer is kind of like practice for that, right?
Yeah. Well, and then, of course, there is, I don't know whether it's Crowley or Mathers, this idea to know, to dare, to will, to be silent. I'll try to dig that up. That's a thing. And
As
but
in 4 ways to be in the world?
yeah, as in part of a process that
Okay.
involves our will doing push-ups. And it's connected to that idea that I've mentioned before, that within certain lineages, there is this idea that average humans, uninitiated, unrefined, undeveloped, are capable of neither great evil nor great good because of the undeveloped state of their will. But that at a certain point, one goes through development, one gains the capacity to employ one's will. This has to do with martial arts. This has to do with shamanism. This has to do with business. This has to do with politics. This has to do with a number of things. Uh, that becomes the key to the car. That becomes again, I've mentioned before as a rock and roll reference, Drive by Incubus. I realized that when I took the wheel and drive, that's when my light, you know, uh, turned on basically. And
Mhm.
so there's an important formula there. And it's like not getting manipulated by fear or desire, by the 8 winds, whatever. That's sort of like taking the emergency brake off, and then applying will is really pushing the gas
Yeah,
and steering the wheel,
yeah,
and then looking out the window is your clarity and your awareness. But to push the gas does require daring as well as willing.
yeah,
And so there's something there as well, that this idea that courage is necessary to practice any of the other virtues.
yeah. Yeah, there's a funny model. I want to say David Hawkins, who kind of like lists all of these emotional states in a hierarchy, and courage is in the middle, and everything below courage is a kind of negative or unawakened state, and everything above courage is like the good stuff. And
Interesting.
so it always takes courage to get to, like, you have to go through courage to get
Right.
to the higher levels, like ultimately love and whatever. I don't remember
Yeah.
the whole
Well, and what
framework.
unfolds it, if you really go into courage, The other side of it is attachment or non-attachment, right? Because what are the
Yeah.
things that hold us back from that? It's like, "Well, but I'll be made a fool of," you know? Well, you wanna get
Yeah,
that out of
yeah,
the way
or
right away from the beginning.
he calls that the secret payoff.
Oh, okay.
Where like when you're angry driving around behind somebody because they're too slow, the secret payoff of being angry is something like what I'm doing is important and and I need to get on with it. Where the universe is obviously
Thinking
feeling differently
differently.
about
Yeah.
that. um, so yeah, kind of sussing out the secret payoff, detaching from it, finding courage. That's kind of like the system that he points to. And then the book is called Letting Go. And then for me, it kind of goes off the rails because he starts talking about specific frequencies that these states live at.
Yeah, I think
And then
he was the kinesiology muscle testing guy, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I looked at one of his books, and
But
it
that chart is cool
yeah, I
with
think I
courage in the
remember that,
middle.
and that's maybe about all that I recall. I remember it
Pretty good.
kind of getting a little culty in its thinking
Yeah.
about
But the
things.
secret payoff idea has been useful too.
Uh-huh, yeah. Well,
Like
and that there's something going on there for sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
you can get a different listening if you're thinking what not like why am I so pissed off, but like what do I get out of this? It's
right.
a different it's a twist that can kind of reveal something
Yeah,
useful.
yeah. And, but again, it's that tweaking of the cognitive model
Yeah.
that creates choice.
But yeah, I really like the greater awareness that um I have through these last few conversations about the difference between taking off the emergency brake and stepping on the gas, the difference between kind of like thinking right and like reading the I Ching and interpreting what it has for you and like you can do a lot of stuff without stepping on the gas. But then stepping on the gas is like actually exerting will in a particular moment when your default setting is to go off in some lame direction that's not constructive,
Mhm.
and to let go of the desire or bewilderment or fear that holds you there, and instead have the courage to exert will and do what you want. It's a
Mhm.
funny thing. I guess
Mhm.
that's magic too, right?
Yeah,
I think I've heard magic described that way.
yeah. Well, it's definitely tangled up with intent
Yeah.
and will and holding intent, and that there's a push-ups that can kinda happen there. And at the same
Yeah.
time, I don't know, maybe this is just part of my own dissociative tendencies, but I notice that there is, like, some type of a biorhythm to that, a
Mm.
biorhythm to my focus and to the things that show up as critical, and I'm not it doesn't feel entirely authored by me. And maybe in the way that the river is not authored by the canoeist,
Mm.
even though he chose to go to this part of the river, that part of the river, there's still
Uh-huh. And now I got it.
yeah.
So yeah, there's like the yin will of it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
and exactly.
emergence and who knows
Yeah, yeah.
where
And
that comes from.
then, what is the deal with this collective yin will?
Mhm.
That's yin because it's hidden, but it seems to be pervasive and inescapable. Um, and what does it have to do with that rough beast anyway?
Mm.
Because we're definitely riding that rough beast now.
Yeah.
We got to get that. You know how the Comanches would one of the ways they say they would break horses is just go up there and you just bite on his ear, you know,
Uh-huh.
and that at some point he's yours, you know.
Uh-huh.
So that's what we need to do to this rough beast. Is that we need to
Uh-huh.
jump up on there, lasso him, and choke him out and bite his ear
Uh-huh.
and
Tame him.
tame
Yeah,
him.
domesticate him.
Yeah, exactly, and that'll be the millennia, right? That'll be the eschaton, childhood's end.
Yeah, that's where I thought you were gonna go.
Well,
Um,
that's the theory. Yeah.
yeah. Cool. Well, there I do think we should leave it.
Yeah, I
Um,
think there's not many stones to be left
yeah.
unturned here.
Well,
So,
thank you. That
yeah,
was
yeah.
interesting and different, and, yeah, I'm gonna have to reread that, Yeats poem some more, and we should pull that clip out too and just, like,
Yeah,
set it aside.
yeah.
Um,
And we'll put it up on the show notes for folks too.
yeah.
And yeah, let me just encourage people to check out the show notes because sometimes I put stuff in there that wasn't directly exactly what was in the show, just to expand on this point, or I give a lot of threads. Go if you want to go off in this direction or that direction or something like that. And I did just to make note, we're on 55 subscribers on YouTube now. So that only leaves
Nice.
us 999,945 for our first million.
Yeah.
Tell your
Yeah. Good
friends.
progress.
Every
Yeah.
time we get a new subscriber, I do this little dance.
Good fortune.
So, if people were out there really doing it, I'd be dropping 20 pounds here just from
Yeah.
all the little dances. So,
From a million dances, yeah.
yeah, I might have to abbreviate the moves at some point, but there's no danger of that now. So
Yeah, yeah. So, come one, come all.
exactly, and I also did get I met somebody in town that said, "Hey, this person that I know has been listening to the podcast, and we've been talking about it after the episodes." So shout out to you guys, you know who you are. And,
Awesome.
yeah,
Thanks for listening.
yeah, exactly. Thanks to everybody. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
Cool. See you later.